How do you manage competition with your lab mates? So should you or should you not be in competition with your lab mates? And your lab mates and you can be competing, sometimes on small things, sometimes on larger things, while being on the same team. And that tension of competing, but using that competition in a constructive way is, I think, an important part of learning in your PhD and probably for your life. Very rarely you get opportunities where you work with people in such long-term projects that you learn the nuances of building long-term trust relationships, as well as learning to set your boundaries. So it's a tension that has to be very carefully navigated. So here is another video in the series of Life in Academia. I try to bring here not just cookie cutter advice about, you know, uh, how to do a project or how to write a resume or productivity tools, but things that are grounded in practicality, grounded in my and my colleagues' experiences, as well as sometimes higher order thinkings, which is not possible when you are looking at a problem in your very, very immediate temporal transient context. Okay, I'm Kshitis. I'm an associate professor, University of Connecticut in the USA, and I'm the principal investigator of a lab. We work mostly in reproductive biology and cancer. But the advice is obviously for everybody in academia, beyond science too. Okay. So when you're working in a lab and you're doing your PhD or your postdoc, you automatically enter into an artificial competition. It depends a lot on the a person's nature too. Some people are more competitive than other people, and the competition can set in because you have papers. You might want to decide on authorships, who's going to be which kind of first author, second author, an author somewhere in between. You might want to concentrate on your own project while not just being a supplier of data for other people's projects. You might compete on fellowships. You might compete on awards with each other. Some those are very limited. In general, academia around the world is always resource scarce, and so there is much greater race to obtain little resources that are available, and so that sets an artificial competition. And that competition can be very ruinous if you make it if you take it very internally and uh, take it personally without using it constructively. Okay, so the you, let me start with that. Do not, first of all, uh, consider that your lab mate's success is your failure. This is a very common trope. Sometimes it happens in very new students who are just entering their first or second year PhD. They come for a very competitive mindset. Okay, they have been in college, they they did very well in the exams. They were competing for the grades, and many of the grades are normally distributed. So if some people get a grade A, then other people probably get a lower grade. And so there is this set of competition that is already in. In many countries, including, for example, I come from in India, many people come to PhD from through some kind of a competitive exam system. I remember there was gate examination that used to happen. They probably are differently named now. And so you are in that very competitive set that you need to score and you need to be ranked in a certain order. Now, PhD is quite different because the pie is you gaining something is not somebody else's loss necessarily. Okay. And you need to be able to learn to navigate a very, very long term game. Most often than not, people who are very short term and display very selfish behavior are left out. And actually, in long term, they lose a lot. It happens very frequently because people start looking at patterns of behavior. This is one thing that you start learning during your PhD because, which you probably did not learn as much earlier, because in PhD you get to spend years together. And so sometimes people say, right, you can fool some people, most people some of the time, or some people most of the time. You cannot people all the time, right? So if there are real pathological or narcissistic behavior that happens in a very small set of people, that gets caught and everyone knows about it, and people make a distance with you, and you, without even realizing, you have already lost so much. Because at the end of the day, a PhD is a very collaborative uh, atmosphere, and it's a collaborative enterprise. Most papers have many authors, and if you try to think that I will be the only person who gains it, you will end up doing 90% of the work, 95% of the work on a paper. You will be the first author, but what you have lost in that time is the opportunity cost to be part of many other projects, many other papers, and you never know which project of those will open windows for you. Okay, for example, you're working on a particular molecule and you are the first author, but you want everything that you do it, but you don't want to collaborate, or you are not being collaborated with by other people because they have recognized this pattern of behavior of always being hyper competitive. You would lose out on another project, and who knows, that's where the field eventually goes and you're completely lost out. Okay, so you need to put your eggs in multiple baskets, which can only happen by collaboration. So think of your lab not really as a competitive space, but as a collaborative space. And because labs typically also have people at different years of life, different years of PhD, it's a great opportunity to be mentored by senior people and to be mentoring younger people. Okay, the newer entrants. I don't want to say younger because many people enter PhD at a very different age, but nevertheless, people who come without this experience, right? And you can develop a very good collaborative mentor-mentee relationship with you being on either side of the equation by not setting up a set, a complete, always looking at that everything is a competitive space. Most people who think everything is competitive tend to lose out. That's been my experience. That's been an experience of nearly all my colleagues. Okay, you compete with the world. You don't compete with your own team. You compete with the world. You don't compete with your own, within your own family. Okay, so do not get into, oh, he got or she got this great paper and I did not get that much, that bigger paper, and so either I lost out, or there was an advantage that was offered to this person. No, that sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you end up finding a great finding that when you follow up leads to a great good paper, and you might be stuck somewhere, and it might just take you a little bit more digging here and there to find that nugget that you have been looking for, right? At least in discovery oriented research, that is very common. So don't think that your lab mates are your competitors as a default. Okay. In fact, to be very frank, what people do not realize is that academia is highly network based, and your lab mates are going to be your future collaborators for life. They would be your reviewers. They would be they would be providing you some complementary expertise, because when they go and become successful in their own careers, while they are in academia or outside academia, they are all, at the end of the day, somewhat they're related to what you've been working with in your PhD, right? So if they happen to be in an adjacent field, that expertise that they would develop in an adjacent field over many decades is exactly what you would need to succeed. So use the time that you are in your lab to develop good relationships with your lab mates. Many labs do an excellent job. I think it is also very much a job of the PI, the principal investigator, or the professor, the supervisor, whichever name you would call it, to inculcate that atmosphere of collaboration. And that can only happen when the PI is, or the supervisor is, completely fair, is aware, and is not listening to hearsay, that is actually aware, right? That the he's not so divorced or so removed from the workings of the lab that somebody presenting data which should be credited to somebody else, or it was used, was created by help of someone else, that information could be hidden. So very high flying professors sometimes get into this problem. It is very important to be very well connected to your lab, and it can be a problem when your lab becomes very large and very hierarchical. So information could be masked from you, and that can lead to resentment in certain people, and that resentment can very quickly metastasize in the lab to create overall an atmosphere of distrust. But then there are some people also who are like that, right? They would take advantage of others. So this is, again, as I mentioned, you must collaborate as a default. You must think of others as your friends, your collaborator, and not only now, here and now, but for in your long-term future. But then you also need to set up boundaries. There are people who are of that nature, who have the art of getting work done through others and never really giving the credit, or even if they give the credit, they just get work done through others. This happens much too frequently, and that pattern has to be recognized, uh, and boundaries set in. I would also say that make sure that you yourself are heard. If you present certain evidence to your supervisor, with some kind of confidentiality that you can develop with your supervisor, the supervisor would appreciate getting these information. They really are not trying to play you against each other. At the end of the day, a great collaborative atmosphere helps the supervisor, right? Because he or she is the one who ultimately succeeds by your labor. But make sure that if there are evidence of that nature, they are presented, and it would be an accumulated set of evidence that would be taken by the supervisor or other people to get a sense of what is really going on. There are people, and you need to set boundaries. There is another video that I prepared on how to do collaboration. Look at it. uh, it those boundaries need to be set in, but you do that not right away, because if you set up a boundary much too early, you will not end up exploring anything beyond your walls. Okay, you'll end up living within your very small four-walled area. But at the same time, if people are taking advantage of you consistently or multiple times, you need to set boundaries, or set to start creating distance between those people, okay, within those people. So, and that can happen with authorships, that can happen with who's being credited, who actually goes and presents the work, and so on and so forth. And there could be many, many opportunities where many people are taking advantage consistently. So if it happens too frequently, you need to speak up. And you need to speak up not in public, but most of the time in confidentiality with your mentors and other people. And sometimes you can also bring other people along, other lab mates, to present evidence that this is what is happening. The most important part is that I think it's like game theory. When you are, in a multi-party relationship, I like game theory sometimes. So it's a nice way to think about some complex problems. Think of finite versus infinite games. Okay, your lab is not a finite space. It can become infinite if you collaborate a lot. Your expertise can be very handy for many, many other projects, and you would get authorships on those projects, and you never know which one of that opens a door for you. You may not be working in neuroscience at all, or you may not be working on a particular molecule, but that's exactly where the job becomes available. But just because you collaborated and were just a third author in that paper would help. So try to maximize your collaborative potential as much as possible, while keeping your project intact, and continuing to grow. But if your lab collaborates and you're part of that collaborative spirit, you will produce better papers, you will have stronger collaboration, you will have greater visibility, you'll present far and wide, and overall you will benefit from the effort of other people, because there is a synergistic effect that starts developing. But it does not take, I can tell you with experience, it does not take more than one or two bad apples to destroy the whole basket, or make it an extremely toxic atmosphere. So that has to be quickly recognized, evidence created, and reported to the supervisor that these kind of occurrences are happening, or that there is too much of a selfish spirit with this particular person, and they will probably cordon that person's projects in a way that, okay, fine, you go do your project, and other people can continue to collaborate with each other. So do not think of your lab as competition. That should be absolutely not a default position of yours. If you have that spirit, try to get out of it, unless there are evidences that build up strongly enough for you to consider that you need to set boundaries. Uh, your default position should be not to set those boundaries unless they become necessary. Okay, and that would probably require you to get off your very innate nature sometimes, and sometimes that not just the nature, but the way you have been doing work till you get into a PhD program, which would probably require a much more competitive spirit than what is necessary within your lab. Okay, so till the next time for another video, please subscribe to this channel. Please share this channel to your friends and colleagues, because I think we are trying to bring some very interesting pieces of advice and practical advice for students, postdocs, and junior faculty and senior faculty of how to plan your life in academia. And as the subscription grows, I'll try to bring other professors and have conversations about some very specific practical problems that we all end up facing in academia. Okay, till then, take care. Goodbye.